What's up, my name is Nasko, and in this video we're going to be talking about FL Studio 12 plugins and how to post-process things or just enhance things or manipulate them. There are quite a few plugins that I want to go over and that I think are very special inside of FL Studio, and there are some more basic plugins I think you kind of have to know a few things about in order to get started with manipulating, post-processing, and just changing the sounds or enhancing them. Alright, so I started off with this little kick right here. And I want this to be my first example because, as you all know, there's a compressor in almost every DAW, and FL Studio has the Fruity Compressor. Now, there's one specific issue I've always had with the Fruity Compressor. That is, if you want to use it to, say, tighten up your drums or tighten up vocals, and you want this transient to really push, but if you look at the mixer channel, you can see it stops at 0 decibels and it just gets really squashed. It doesn't go anywhere above that. And if you use any other compressor, that's usually not the case. What is going on right here is that basically what ImageLine have done is they've implemented an internal limiter into the compressor that is set at 0 decibels threshold, and we don't necessarily want that for this kick. You know, we really want this to punch like crazy. So what can we do? Well, you can use the compressor as it is. You can use the threshold, the ratio, attack, release, and the type. But after that, you shouldn't be using the gain. So once you've set up your stuff, what you can use is either, say, the soft clipper. You can use that. But I would rather just recommend you to use something like the Fruity Waveshaper. And as you can see right here, we can move this curve, and this is basically just gain with saturation. So as we keep pushing this up, you can see what it's doing. Now, this doesn't obviously sound too great. Our kick starts to distort, and that's not very good. So another way to go about this, in order to make it not distort, is by basically soft or hard clipping this. What we're doing right here is just saturating it. And what we can do is we can just add another point, put it up here, and slowly start going to the left side. And then go back a bit, and there you go. And this is just one example right here, but if you just listen to the before and the after, you can tell that we've added some punch to this kick. We can go a bit more extreme if we wanted to. So just push it back a bit more. There we go. We've just added a lot of punch. And so I would really recommend you to use this sort of combination. And you can also, obviously, you can go a little bit softer about this. You don't have to go all hard clip. You can soften it up a bit, and you can just find the sweet spot. All right. Up to our next example is a bit more complex post-processing, say if you make any sort of very heavy genres such as dubstep or hybrid trap and all that kind of stuff. I've got two examples right here. This is a growl and this is an FM bass. There's numerous things you can do inside of FL Studio that you probably wouldn't have known, because there is this plugin called Effector, and usually this plugin doesn't look too complex at all. It's just a bunch of effects and you can't really customize them, you would think. But there's actually a lot more behind this plugin than you would think. Because this has a lot of great effects that you don't just find around here in your plugin library. For example, if we turn off the bypass, we have things such as a flanger that is constant. So it stays at this resonance position, and it's almost like a resonator. And then you've got lo-fi, which is a bit crushing effect, which is really cool as well. And all of these effects are very high quality as well. You've got a ring modulator, which is really cool as well. And one of my favorites is the Vox. This is a formant filter, and it's really, really great for growls. The thing is that this really pumps up the volume. So what you can do is turn on the dry wet a lot. And then you can adjust it. And there you go. That sounds pretty cool. And you can obviously create automation clips and just move these things around. And yeah, there's a lot of cool effects in here. Especially as a sort of instant reverb. Really nice. And an instant high pass, low pass filter. So you can just try playing around with this thing and you're going to find a lot of cool things. So yeah, that is one thing I could use to sort of manipulate hard bass sounds, or even just add it to things, especially the lo-fi. You can add to things for transitioning, and the reverb you can just use as a very quick reverb, and with the ring mod you can put that on a voice and make it really cool sounding. Alright, so the next thing is Vocodex, and this is one of the biggest deals about FL Studio. Because Vocodex has a very unique sound. And if you combine Vocodex, say, with a hard-hitting bass like this growl or this FM bass, you can make some really, really cool stuff with it. So if we just activate it, you can already hear it doing a lot to the sound. Now, this obviously doesn't sound too great. We can also turn up the width. But what we can do is, about Vocodex, it's just that you have to have the right settings for it to sound really good. So the first thing I would always recommend you to do is turn off the draft mode. Because the draft mode is basically just a different sound for the real-time producing. When you're producing, basically, this plugin is working a bit different, rather than if this thing is on, what's basically happening is that this sounds different than rendered. So whenever you render, Vocodex is going to sound different. So turn this thing off. And now what we can also do is turn down the bands to, say, 20. And you can already hear it's doing some really cool things. It sounds a lot more slimy. And what's really great about this plugin is that you have options such as formant, or male and female. And you can put in multiple voices as well to make it stereo, if you want to do so. But the great part about this is that if you combine Vocodex with, say, OTT, which is a free plugin by Xfer, you can get some really, really cool sounding effects. And it doesn't just work on growls, it also works on FM basses, for example, as you can hear right now. And you get a lot of cool new sounds out of this. And I also always recommend you to use OTT, because with Vocodex, what happens is that it really just changes all the frequencies. It just takes them into a box and just like wiggles it around. So I recommend you to use OTT afterwards, usually, to just sort of fix all of the frequencies that are like super loud and sound a bit harsh to the ear. But yeah, you can totally use this. All right, the next thing would be reverb and delay. So I've got this little app right here. And we can just go ahead and open it up. I'm going to load in a reverb too, and this is a really cool reverb. It's got a lot of options. You don't have to understand most of them, but the most important are the damp. Acts as a sort of low pass. Yeah, and the low cut and the high cut. And obviously you can just use this thing as well to get a different type of reverb. And then you've got the decay knob, which is really, really important. And the dry and wet. So I can add some more life to this plug by utilizing the reverb. And another really cool plugin, I'm going to put this before the reverb, which is called Fruity Delay 2. Now, initially, I just tried it out, and when I first tried it out, and I put it to ping pong and it didn't really do anything. And I really like ping pong delays, and I think they're really great to add a lot of depth to your sound. But at some point I noticed how to actually use this thing, and it's by turning on the ping pong mode and then panning the input. As you can hear right now, it's a very nice sounding delay, and you can also use the low cut option right here. And you can change the time of the delay as well. You can make it even faster. Just put it right there. And we've just brought this thing to life, pretty much. Alright, and obviously another plugin you would probably always be using is the Parametric EQ. This is a really good EQ, especially because you can just easily size it. I personally don't really like the analyzer itself, but it's really nice to see the resonating frequencies. And it just helps you see where your main fundamental frequencies are and which frequencies might be too much. So this is a really good EQ, but you gotta be careful because, as you know, in the mixer channel, you have all of these dry-wet knobs right here. And I've noticed that whenever I wanted to use, say, let's see if we've got a preset in here. For example, this old telephone. And I wanted to mix in between this telephone preset and the original, and I would do this. You get a little bit of a problem because you have to turn off the HQ mode. It might not be as noticeable with this preset, but if I just load up the default one and just do some changes, you can tell right here, it doesn't sound really clean. Something is going on. So when you turn off the HQ mode, it lets you fade in between very smoothly. That's just another fun fact about the Parametric EQ, and yeah, after you've done that, it's really nice. You can utilize it whenever you want, and it's pretty great. All right, so the next thing I want to go over is the Multiband Compressor inside of FL Studio 12. It's not that popular, and I can kind of tell why. It's not the best one, but it's, if you use it right, it's totally great. So for example, I have this little example right here. And this is just a pre-master, so sort of, if you want to go inside the mastering process, this is a very nice plugin to use, actually. First thing I would recommend you to do is always changing it, if you're using this for mastering purposes, always changing it from IIR to FIR. And the next thing I would recommend you to do is change these crossfades right here to something else. So I'm just going to move them down a bit. That in itself is already going to make it sound better. And now what you can do is you can set the threshold. All of these, let's just set them to minus 18 decibels. And turn up the ratio for the highs, for example, to say 8 to 1, the mid band to say 4 to 1, and the low band to say 6 to 1. Right there. And honestly, it has pretty much everything you need from a multiband compressor. It is only downwards compression though. So in Ableton, you would have downwards and upwards compression. In this multiband compressor, you only have downwards compression, but that's still fine. But what you can do now is you can, for example, take in another Parametric EQ, turn off the HQ mode, and you can dial in the volume. And the more you dial it in, as you can see right here, the more the multiband compressor is working. Which is really nice because sometimes in your pre-masters, in your mixdown, you have a lot of transients going on. that are way too loud. And the multiband compressor of FL takes good care of that. As you can see right here, the red line basically just indicates that it's starting to compress. So this is really nice. You don't just have to use this on, say, mastering, but you can use this as well for basses. Say if you don't have OTT, for example, on this FM bass, I turn off these two effects right here. I can use this on IRR mode because we're not in mastering process right now. And I can strongly compress this by turning down the thresholds a lot, turning up the ratios, turning up the attack a bit, and obviously changing the crossfades. As you can see, changing those crossfades does a lot. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize whenever they try to use the Fruity Multiband Compressor. The way these crossfades are set in the beginning isn't that great. It sounds kind of weird. And so just move them down a bit. They also snap the crossfade points. And after you've done that, it sounds a lot better. So as you can tell right now, we've strongly compressed the signal. And it honestly sounds a lot better now. And you didn't have to really use OTT at all. You can achieve similar effects with the multiband compressor. Alright, the next thing is the Transient Processor inside of FL Studio. This hasn't been in FL Studio for a long time, and they finally added it a few months ago, and it's great. So I've got this head loop right here with rides, and I just want it to be tighter, you know. So we can load up Transient Processor, and we have a lot of options right here, but the most important ones are attack, release, and these two right here, and maybe drive depending on what you're using it on. Okay, so if you want to make things tighter or just wider, you can use the release knob. If you want to make things pop more or pop less, you can use the attack knob. So since we want to make these hi-hats tighter, we're going to turn down the release. And as you can hear, the Transient Processor is working quite great. You can also resize this, I think. Nope, can't, never mind. All right. And by adjusting this release shape right here, you can make it less harsh or even more harsh. But I usually recommend you, if you want to turn down the release, I would recommend you to just have a very slow release shape like that. It's still going to take a lot of that room away. And you can do the opposite and just make it really loud. It's almost like a compression effect. But yeah, it's a very, very nice transient shaper. All right, the next effect I want to go over is grow speed. And a lot of you, if you're inside of the whole trap industry, you probably know about this plugin already, but it's a very nice plugin because it has a very cool effect in it. Honestly, a lot of cool effects in it, but one of my favorites is if you go inside, if you just open up grow speed and if you go to presets, momentary, you have things such as halftime speed. And this is really cool because if you have, say, this piano loop right here, you can make a totally new sample out of this by using grow speed. And so we can open this up and have the halftime speed on, and it'll sound like this. Right. And if you want to save that as a sample, what you can do with pretty much everything inside of FL Studio is use Edison. You can just load it up in the master. I would recommend you to use it on the master. And you can just hit the record button and just play whatever you want to. And it'll start recording for you. So yeah. About Edison as well, I use this a lot whenever I produce because it's just such a great sample editor. And it's especially great if you've got samples that have a lot of tail, like this one right here. This has a lot of tail, and the sampler inside of FL Studio is pretty great, but as you can tell, if I want to outfade this, it doesn't quite get to the beginning of the sample. So we still end up with this tail, and I can't remove it. And what you can do is just go to any sampler or sample, go right-click, go to Edit, and it's going to automatically open up Edison. And now you can see your sample. And I can just select, say, this part of the sample right here, and just drag it back in. And now I can tighten up the snare a lot better. And if I want it to be even shorter, I can do that. Whoops. Just drag it back in. And there you go. All right. Another thing is a really cool effect, actually. And Ableton does have this sort of, but it's not as great as inside of FL Studio. It's the Fruity Convolver. This is a really cool plugin because what it does is it takes a sample and makes a reverb sort of algorithm out of it. Or there's a sort of like algorithm that uses a sample to make reverb out of it. Right now we've got this sample in here. And it's going to use that to create reverb on these vocoder loops, on this vocoder loop right here. So let's just activate it. And this is a very cool reverb effect because there's just so many things you can use, and a lot of these just sound really good. But one effect in particular inside of here is the blur. And you have two options. You have the blur pink and the blur white. I would recommend you to use blur pink because that's less harsh and sounds a lot more appealing to the ears. So when you select that, what it's basically doing is just completely washing out the sample. And this is what it sounds like. So you can literally turn anything into an atmospheric pad. You can even use songs. I would recommend you to pick parts where there's no drums going on, but you can pick songs and make pads out of them, which is amazing. And it's so easy to do inside of FL Studio. So yeah, this is how you can post-process and manipulate audio and synths inside of FL Studio 12.